A bar manager is sentenced to 7 days in jail for failing to comply with a shutdown order amid the epidemic. A single new case of COVID-19 in the city. And Japan considering extending a state of emergency to the entire country. Hello and a very good evening. A bar manager today received a 1-week jail term for violating a government order shutting down bars to stem the spread of the coronavirus.
This is the first time someone has been sentenced to prison for failing to comply with the anti-epidemic measure. Caleb Leung has the details.
The defendant, Lo Wai-sheng, was charged at Kowloon City Magistracy with failing to comply with directions issued by Secretary for Food and Health under the law. The court was told that Lo was the person responsible for running Thai Master, a bar in Tsim Sha Tsui. Police raided the premises on Hai Phong Road in the early hours of April 8th. The court heard that the front door of the bar was locked, but people were able to enter through the back door. The police found 64 customers inside the bar and immediately arrested Lo. The defendant pleaded guilty to the charge, saying he had to take care of the livelihoods of more than 10 employees, and the bar was open because it was his friend's birthday. But when acting principal magistrate Ada Yim asked him why they did not drink juice instead, Lo said he had nothing to say. During her sentencing, Yim said Lo had put the lives of his staff and customers at risk by keeping the business open. Noting that the starting point sentence is 2 weeks in prison, the magistrate slashed the jail term to 1 week as Lo had pleaded guilty, and it was the first time that he had committed the offense. Earlier this month, the health chief ordered the city's bars and pubs to shut down for 2 weeks, starting on April 3rd, to help stop the spread of COVID-19. The direction was issued under the Prevention and Control of Disease Regulation. The maximum penalty for violating the order is 6 months in prison and a fine of $50,000. The health chief later decided to keep the order in place until at least April 23rd. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
More signs tonight the number of local infections may be leveling off as health authorities reported only 1 new case of COVID-19 today. This brings the total number of infections to 1,017. But as Kena Chu reports, authorities still think it's too early to relax the government's social distancing measures.
For 5 days in a row, the number of new cases reported has stayed in the single-digit realm. In a record low, only 1 new patient was reported today, a 19-year-old who studies in the UK. She returned to the city on April 1st and submitted a deep throat saliva sample a day later, which tested negative for COVID-19. After 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine at a hotel, she began experiencing an itchy throat on April 13th, but brushed it off. Fast forward to yesterday, a fever sent her to Caritas Medical Center, where she tested positive. Despite the encouraging numbers, authorities say it's still premature to relax any of the government-mandated measures that keep a lid on the virus.
From public health point of view, because this disease, they have asymptomatic transmission, and also mild cases can also transmit the disease. So we have to maintain social distancing. Otherwise it's very
Japan's public broadcaster NHK is reporting the government is considering extending a state of emergency to the entire country. Last week, the measures were declared for Tokyo, Osaka, and 5 other regions to help stop the spread of the coronavirus. About 9,000 people have been infected in the country, leading to almost 200 deaths. Meanwhile, foreign workers in Singapore's trade-dependent economy account for half of the city-state's COVID-19 cases. The country has almost 3,700 coronavirus infections, with a fifth of total cases detected in a single dormitory. As many as 20 laborers often share cramped living quarters, something that helps the disease spread. Thousands of workers who come from poorer Asian nations have now been quarantined in their dorms or moved to alternative sites to reduce crowding. Singapore has imposed a partial lockdown until May 4th and made it mandatory for people to wear masks when they go out. 10 people have died from the virus in the city-state.
Authorities in the United States are cautiously preparing Americans for life post-outbreak, which would make the wearing of face masks the new normal in the age of COVID-19. Even as the COVID-19 death toll approaches 31,000 in the United States, local and federal government are starting to think about reopening, or at least a partial reopening of the economy. And in some places, people are getting impatient. In Michigan, car-honking activists swarmed a state house to protest stay-at-home restrictions in the state. Dubbed Operation Gridlock and organised by a mixture of Trump supporters and other conservatives, they aim to challenge the Democratic governor's social distancing measures, among the strictest in America. One activist summed up the dilemma facing policymakers everywhere. When does the lockdown become more damaging than the disease itself?
This arbitrary blanket spread of shutting down businesses, about putting all of these workers out of business, it's a disaster. It's an economic disaster for Michigan. We have flattened the curve and we have lessened the pain of this. I know people are still going to get sick, and I think that's horrible. I've personally known people that have passed. But this grip of destruction that Michigan is under right now just feels like bureaucracy.
Still, even members of Donald Trump's coronavirus task force say now is not the time to relax social distancing rules.
This is a highly contagious virus. Social gatherings coming together, is there always a chance that an asymptomatic person can spread the virus unknowingly? All of you that are out there that would like to join together and just have that dinner party for 20, don't do it yet. Continue to follow the presidential guidelines.
Meanwhile, the governors of Connecticut, Maryland, New York and Pennsylvania each issued orders or recommendations that residents wear face masks as they emerge from isolation in the coming weeks.
I'm going to issue an executive order that says all people in public must have a mask or nose covering, mouth and nose covering.
Similar orders have also been imposed in New Jersey and California. And face coverings were recommended by Kansas on Tuesday. The World Health Organization is rejecting the claim that it did not issue strong enough warnings about the risks of the coronavirus in January. Alan Buckner reports.
On Tuesday, U.S. President Donald Trump said he would suspend funding to the WHO, accusing the organization of failing to do enough to stop the virus from spreading after it first surfaced in China. The WHO rejects the notion.
In the first weeks of January, WHO was very, very clear. We alerted the world on January the 5th. Systems around the world, including the US, began to activate their incident management systems on January the 6th. And through the next number of weeks, we've produced multiple updates to countries, including briefing multiple governments, multiple scientists around the world on the developing situation.
The WHO's executive director says the withdrawal of U.S. funding just increases the risk posed by the virus outbreak.
When we're divided, the virus exploits the cracks between us.
A former legal counsel at the WHO says trying to shame China by accusing it of covering up the extent of the outbreak during its early stages in December probably would have been a mistake.
What would we have gained? I think nothing. We would have actually forced China to posture and maybe to be less cooperative.
Meanwhile, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced extra funding of $150 million for the WHO to battle COVID-19, upping its commitment to $250 million. Melinda Gates called Trump's decision to stop funding the WHO dangerous and nonsensical.
They are exactly the organization that can deal with this pandemic. We need a global, coordinated response. Why don't we have smallpox on the planet anymore? It's because of WHO and its partners and a coordinated response.
Alan Buckner, TVB News.
Worldwide infections of COVID-19 have now soared past 2 million. Meanwhile, virus-related deaths in the UK are creating a backlog in funerals. Leslie Tang has more.
The UK now has the 5th highest COVID-19 death toll in the world.
12,868 people have sadly died, an increase of 761. This all just goes to show why we cannot let up in our efforts.
The sheer number of people dying is creating a backlog in funerals. A funeral director in England said they used to deal with 50 to 60 funerals a month. Now, in the times of COVID-19, they were recently contacted about 25 in just one day.
It's just crazy. All the sensitivity has been taken out of a funeral. It's unbelievable. I've never known anything like it.
In Italy, the plight of the elderly in nursing homes has come to light. Police are investigating a Milan nursing home where over 140 people are believed to have died in the past month. The probe began after staff complained that the management did not allow them to wear masks to avoid alarming residents. Spain has rebooted some sectors, and its prime minister toured a sewing workshop, which is now a face mask production line. Workers here usually put the finishing touches on bridal gowns and suits for the country's biggest department store chain. Europe's economic powerhouse, Germany, announced small shops can open their doors as early as next week. But Chancellor Angela Merkel said the country can only gradually return to regular school life after May 4th. And to a story with plenty of heart. British Army veteran Captain Tom Moore has set himself the goal of walking 100 laps around his garden before he turns 100 on April 30th. His quest started as a humble fundraiser for the National Health Service, which is fighting the virus pandemic. Moore wanted to thank the staff who took care of him when he broke his hip. He thought it would be a stretch to reach his target of about $1,200, but has already raised more than $15 million.
It started to take off. I think we're all amazed. I couldn't believe, and we still can't believe.
Leslie Tang, TVB News.
Elsewhere in Europe, a bell in the South Tower of the iconic Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris rang out to join the nightly rounds of applause for frontline medical staff. The 13-ton bell, named Emmanuel, traditionally rings out on solemn occasions. The symbolic ringing of the bell comes a year after a fire that devastated part of the treasured landmark in the French capital. Restoration work has been halted due to the country's national lockdown.
Still ahead, more about the final results of this year's DSE exam in case the tests are not held as planned. In South Korea, President Moon Jae-in's party wins an absolute majority in the parliament. And tensions in the Persian Gulf between Iranian naval vessels and U.S. Coast Guard ships. Welcome back. This year's Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education examination is set to begin in around 1 week's time.
But concerns linger over the assessment frameworks the authorities proposed in case the exam is cancelled because of the coronavirus pandemic. Jackie Lin with more.
Amid the general state of uncertainty besetting this year's DSE exam, there seems to be some degree of assurance as day school candidates receive their new admission forms today. The forms have their exam subjects, dates, and venues updated, but don't come with a candidate's photo. So candidates are reminded to bring along their old forms during exams for identity verification. Some students hope there won't be further delays in the public exam as it could dampen their study motivation and momentum. Earlier, authorities said should the pandemic worsen, written exams for the DSE have to be called off. Grades will then be computed according to candidates' internal exam results and their school's past DSE performances. Some students worry that this could derail their overseas study applications. Like this student who says her predicted grade for English language is level 2, which is the lowest passing grade. If the written exam is scrapped, she worries her internal test results are insufficient to meet the admission requirements of a number of UK universities which have given her conditional offers. A secondary school principal added the mechanism could also put candidates from schools of lower banding at a disadvantage if their grades are moderated based on the results of their previous cohorts. Today, Education Chief Kevin Yeung vowed to come up with an assessment framework that can fully reflect candidates' abilities. He said they won't make the decision to impose a cap on grades at the moment. But for candidates who could not sit the exam due to sickness, the maximum grade will still be lowered from level 5 star to level 5. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
The second phase of MTR's Tuen Ma line connecting Tai Wai Station with West Rail Line's Hung Hom Station is slated to open next year. The MTR Corporation says it's taking all possible measures to minimize the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on supplies to prevent further delays. Haley Zhou reports.
The MTR Corporation says the Tai Wai to Hung Hom section of its newest Tuen Ma line is 99% complete. The cross-harbor section connecting Hung Hom and Admiralty is expected to begin services in the first quarter of 2022. This as the COVID-19 pandemic has affected supply chains on the mainland and in South Korea.
The impact was initially quite substantial, but I think as time goes by, I think we have a range of alternative source of supply. We are doing some resequencing work now, prioritize the critical work to make sure the progress is as planned. So we are doing everything to minimize the impact and also the cost increase arising from this epidemic situation.
Some 8 9-car trains made in South Korea will be imported to replace the existing 12-car trains, which would better fit into the newly built stations on the Hong Kong island.
With the new signaling system and the new train being introduced into the East Rail Line, we were able to run across the harbour and become the 4th harbour crossing railway and relieve the congestion not only on the East Rail Line but also other harbour crossing railway lines.
The MTR Corporation says new trains will be more spacious than existing ones, and the gap between the platform and train will be reduced. Both old and new trains will run at the same time during a transition period of about 18 months. The first phase of MTR's Tuen Ma line connecting Tai Wai with Kai Tak opened in February. Haley Zhou, TVB News.
The High Court ruled the Independent Police Complaints Council has powers to initiate a fact-finding study on anti-government protests last year. In his judgment, Judge Keith Young said the IPCC ordinance gives the police watchdog powers to do all such things that are reasonably necessary for the performance of its functions. Activist Hendrik Loy filed a judicial review claiming the IPCC did not have statutory powers to look into matters related to the social unrest and that it only could review complaints reported to the police watchdog. The IPCC has not published its interim report on some major protest events yet, citing this judicial review case. The interim report was originally due in December last year. Overseas again, South Korean President Moon Jae-in's Democratic Party has won an absolute majority in parliamentary elections held yesterday. It's the first major election to be held amid the pandemic. Authorities enforced strict safety measures, disinfecting all 14,000 polling stations and requiring voters to wear masks, have their temperatures checked, use hand sanitizer, plastic gloves and maintain a safe distance from others. Moon's approval rating suffered a blow in February when the country became one of the first outside China to suffer a serious outbreak of COVID-19. But analysts say the administration's largely successful campaign to fight back against the coronavirus provided a surge in popularity for Moon and his Progressive Party going into the polls.
A group of 11 Iranian naval vessels made what U.S. officials called dangerous and harassing maneuvers near U.S. Coast Guard ships in the Persian Gulf near Kuwait yesterday. The American statement said 6 U.S. ships were conducting drills with helicopters in international waters. It said at one point an Iranian vessel came within 10 yards of a U.S. Coast Guard cutter. It described the actions as dangerous and provocative that increased the risk of miscalculation and collision. Such interactions had occurred occasionally a few years ago, but stopped more recently. This latest incident comes at a time of increased tension between the U.S. and Iran.
And that is our main news for Thursday night.
Yep.
Thanks for watching.
Good night.